When I moved into the old house on Maple Street, I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. It was a small, single-story place with chipped paint, but it had a certain charm to it. The kind of charm that made me think I could turn it into something special. The house had been on the market for a while, and I got it for a good price. The previous owner had passed away, and the family had been eager to sell it quickly. I didn't ask too many questions. It was a nice house in a nice neighborhood, and I thought it was a bargain. The first few days were a blur of unpacking and getting settled. There was something almost comforting about the old house, like it had been waiting for someone to come and breathe life into it again. The walls were thick, and the windows let in just enough light to make the place feel cozy, even during the colder, darker months. But there was one thing that nagged at me from the start. The front door. Every time I left the house, I made sure to lock the door. It was an old habit, something my dad had drilled into me from a young age. Always lock the door behind you, he'd say, even if you're just stepping out for a minute. So whenever I went out, I'd double-check the lock, making sure it was secure before heading on my way. But no matter how careful I was, I'd come back to find the door unlocked. The first time it happened, I thought I'd just forgotten. I'd been distracted, maybe, focused on the long list of things I needed to get done. But it kept happening. Every single time I came back, the door would be unlocked. At first, I shrugged it off as an old lock that needed replacing. But after a week of this, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. One evening, after a long day of running errands, I came home with a bag of takeout, ready to crash on the couch and watch some TV. As usual, I double-checked the front door before leaving, making sure it was locked tight. But when I got back, the door was slightly ajar. My heart sank. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, my mind racing through all the possibilities. Had someone been inside? Was I just being paranoid? I pushed the door open, the old hinges creaking. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're not alone. I stepped inside, setting the takeout on the kitchen counter, and did a quick check of the place. Everything seemed to be in order. Nothing was missing, nothing out of place. But the air felt different, heavier, like something was hanging in the atmosphere, just out of reach. As I was about to head to the living room, I heard a noise from the basement. It was faint, barely audible, but enough to make my skin crawl. A soft, rhythmic creaking sound, like wood rubbing against wood. I hesitated at the top of the basement stairs, my hand hovering over the light switch. I didn't want to go down there. The basement was the one part of the house I hadn't fully explored. It was cold and damp, with low ceilings and exposed pipes that made it feel more like a dungeon than a storage space. But the sound persisted, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I flicked on the light, and the bare bulb cast a dim, yellowish glow over the stairs. The creaking grew louder as I descended, each step sending a shiver down my spine. When I reached the bottom, I saw it. In the corner of the basement, half covered in shadows, was a rocking chair. It was old, with peeling paint and a sagging seat, but it was unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized it. It was identical to a chair I had thrown out before moving in. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How had it gotten here? Who had brought it into the house? And why was it rocking ever so slightly back and forth? My hands were shaking as I reached out to touch it, but as soon as my fingers brushed against the wood, the chair stopped moving. The basement fell silent, the air thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something sweet and sickly like old perfume. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest, and hurried up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. I didn't go back down there that night. Instead, I locked every door and window, double-checked the locks, and tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the chair, rocking back and forth in the corner of the basement. I tossed and turned, the unease gnawing at me until finally, I drifted off into a restless sleep. It must have been the middle of the night when I woke up to the sound of creaking. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment I was disoriented, unsure of where I was. But then I heard it again. The unmistakable sound of wood rubbing against wood, coming from the basement. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The house was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the curtains. The sound was faint, but it was there, steady and rhythmic. I didn't want to go down there, and didn't want to face whatever was making that noise. But I knew I couldn't ignore it. Not this time. I grabbed my phone, the small screen casting a weak light as I made my way down the hall. My hand trembled as I reached for the basement door, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I opened the door, The creaking was louder now, echoing up the stairs, each sound making my heart skip a beat. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and slowly made my way down the stairs. The basement was cold, damp, and eerily silent. The chair was still in the corner, exactly where I had seen it before. But this time, it wasn't empty. There, sitting in the chair, was an old woman. Her skin was pale and wrinkled, her hair thin and gray, pulled back into a tight bun. She wore a faded dress that looked like it belonged to another era, and her hands were folded neatly in her lap. But it was her eyes that terrified me the most. Cloudy, vacant, staring straight ahead, as if she didn't see me at all. The chair rocked back and forth, the rhythmic creaking filling the air. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge me in any way. She just sat there, her gaze fixed on some point in the distance. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was frozen in place, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out of there, but my body refused to obey. And then, slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. Her mouth moved, her lips parting slightly, as if she was trying to say something, but no sound came out. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other, the creaking of the chair the only sound in the basement. And then the rocking stopped. The basement fell silent, the air thick with tension. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, the chair was empty. The old woman was gone. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest, and locked the basement door behind me. I didn't go back to bed that night. Instead, I sat in the living room, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But there was no explanation, no rational way to understand what I had seen. All I knew was that the house wasn't empty. Not anymore. The next morning, I was exhausted, my mind clouded with fear and confusion. I knew I couldn't stay in the house, but I didn't know where to go. I felt trapped, like I was being watched, even in the daylight. I decided to do some research, hoping to find some answers. I started with the previous owner, trying to learn more about who had lived in the house before me. It didn't take long to find out. The name was right there on the deed. Eleanor Martin. She had lived in the house for over 50 years. A widow who had raised her children there and stayed long after they had moved away. She had died in the house alone, and her children had sold it soon after. The more I learned about her, the more the pieces started to fall into place. The rocking chair had been hers, a gift from her late husband. It had been her favorite spot where she would sit for hours, knitting or reading, long after the house had emptied out. I contacted the previous owner's son, hoping he could shed some light on what was happening. He was hesitant to talk at first, but eventually he opened up. "My mother loved that chair," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "She spent most of her days in it, even after she got sick. We tried to get rid of it after she passed, but every time we did, it would end up back in the house. We didn't know what to do, so we just left it in the basement." I felt a chill run down my spine as he spoke, the pieces clicking together in my mind. The chair hadn't been brought into the house, it had always been there, waiting for her. That night, I knew I had to confront whatever was in the house. I couldn't live like this, couldn't go on feeling like a prisoner in my own home. I had to face it no matter how terrified I was. I waited until it was dark, until the house was silent, and then I made my way to the basement. The fear was almost overwhelming, but I forced myself to keep going, one step at a time. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the chair was there, just as I had expected. It was empty, but the air around it felt charged, like something was waiting. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The chair remained still, the room silent, but I could feel her presence like a cold breath on the back of my neck. And then I spoke. "Eleanor," I said, my voice trembling. "If you're here, I want you to know that this is your home. You don't have to leave. But please, don't scare me. I'm just trying to live here, just like you did." For a moment, nothing happened. The chair remained still, the room silent, but I could feel her presence, like a cold breath on the back of my neck. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. The chair rocked back and forth, the creaking sound filling the room, but this time it didn't feel threatening. It felt peaceful. The room grew colder, the air thickening with the scent of old perfume, and I knew she was there. But this time I wasn't afraid. I watched the chair rock for a few minutes, my fear slowly ebbing away. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the rocking stopped. The basement fell silent, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I knew in that moment that Eleanor was at peace. The next day, I moved the chair out of the basement and into the living room, placing it by the window where the sunlight could reach it. I never saw the old woman again, but sometimes, when the house is quiet and the wind is still, I hear the faint sound of the chair creaking, rocking back and forth. And I know that Eleanor is still there, watching over her home, just like she always did.